back, guys, to episode 7 of the Nick Solomon Show, the Sports Chatter Podcast. Folks, I have a great lineup today to talk about. I have some really good topics to get through today, so this is going to be a good episode. I can feel it, absolutely. There's a lot of things happening right now in the world of sports, so it was really tough to get down to the certain topics that I want to get into, but I hit a very well-known topic, as well as one that is sort of in the back of everyone's mind, but they may not talk about it as much as it's coming to the forefront here. But we'll get to that in our last segment. But our first segment here is the college football playoffs. Now, they aren't scheduled for a few weeks now, but there's a lot of buzz coming on who was selected, why they were selected, and how they were selected. So the first, I just want to let you guys know who are the 4 college football playoff teams. Number 1, Michigan versus number 4, Alabama. Number 2, Washington versus number 3, Texas. Quick little breakdown of each team. So number 1 team, Michigan, they're entering the CFP playoff 13-0. They have the number 1 scoring defense as well as the number 2 overall defense. Alabama's stats are the 12-1, that one loss coming at home versus Texas, in which a game that they lost by 14 points. But they do boast top 20 in both offense and defensive rankings. How I think that game is going to go off, I mean, Michigan has the edge as far as experience of players overall. They have a lot of returning veterans that are not just 2 years, but 3 years into the program, even some 4-year, even 5th-year players as well. Michigan has a better D. They have a more experienced quarterback, running back, and offensive line. The injury to Zach Zinter versus Ohio State, it still leaves me a bit to be questioned going against Alabama. I'm a little worried about that, because he was a very key piece, and I don't want anyone to underrate how significant of an injury that is. However, as good of a job as they did the rest of the game versus Ohio State, and then the whole game versus Iowa, and Iowa still has a top 10 defense, just speaks to the level of depth that Michigan has on the offensive line. So, do I still feel confident? Yes. That doesn't mean that I'm not worried that could be potentially exploited, or could maybe overthink or underthink the coaching staff's ability to call certain plays because of the loss to Zach Zinter, who was such a big leader, both in the locker room, in the huddle. I mean, he was a guy who could have came out last year and been one of the top guard prospects. So, having said that, they still have the more experienced offensive line. Bama, well, it's Bama. They have that aura. You know, there's not that many teams, if any other teams other than Alabama, have this sort of aura around them. And what do I mean by that? So, Bama has been there and done that. They've won. They win. It's kind of that, they kind of bring in this mystique, although it's not that mysterious. Every team, whether they say it publicly or not, probably fears Alabama in football. They step on the field and they're like, okay, we could get our asses handed to us 50-7 today, at home. Maybe 55-0 if it's in Alabama. They're probably going to put in their backups in the fourth quarter. That's kind of been Alabama's MO for the better part of a decade and a half. So they have this aura that we're Alabama, we're just better than you, just because. And they have the track record that they have backed that up. And a part of that is their coach. They have Nick Saban. And that does account for something, because he's been there and he's done that many times. 6, in fact. So that is where I'm at with Bama and Michigan as far as how just who they are and just what I think that they'll bring to the actual matchup. Now, how do I think it will play out? I can see it very much as the game of Michigan versus Penn State, where it was a 24-16 or 27-16 or 13 win for Michigan. Very slow, very ugly, very defensive oriented. The last 3 games for Michigan versus Iowa actually 4 games versus Iowa versus Ohio State, Maryland, and Penn State have not been the best offensively for Michigan. Now, they've put over 25 points in those games, but they haven't been the 30-plus point per game team that they had been prior to those 4 games. Having said that, they're still a top 10 scoring offense. They're actually a point and a half behind Washington in scoring point-wise on average. So I think this game is going to be very kind of in the 20s, like a 20-14, 20-17 type game for Michigan, and that does not make me feel comfortable. I'd much rather this be a boring blowout for Michigan. Absolutely so. My prediction is I do have Michigan winning 20-17. Actually, 23-17. I'll raise Michigan's score. You could say they're balanced, but they're effective with how they do things and how they control it. You know, having a veteran quarterback, veteran running backs, a veteran offensive line, you can control the line of scrimmage. You can control your possessions. You feel a bit more comfortable that on a 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2, depending on what side of the field you're at and what down line you're on, you feel okay going into that situation, regardless of who the opponent is. Even on 3rd and 10, I'd feel okay that something positive is going to happen more often than not. So that's where I'm at with Michigan and Alabama. Number 2, Washington versus number 3, Texas. Washington is 13-0. They're the only other undefeated team in the college football playoff. They're the number 1 passing offensive team, and they're in top 10 in scoring as well. Texas, they're 12-1. Their one loss coming in a neutral site game versus Oklahoma. It was a 3-point loss, I believe. Came down to the wire with that Oklahoma and Texas game. Overall, Texas is probably the most balanced team of these 4 teams. They're really good in running the ball, they're really good in passing the ball, and they're really good on defense, both run defense and pass defense. Washington's passing ability is very dangerous. They're the number 1 passing team. They have probably the best trio of wide receivers, arguably, across Division I. And they can run the ball. Their running ability has come along a little bit lately here. Having said that, they do have, of the 4 teams, the worst defense, too. And having said that, they're a top 30 defensive team. But they are the worst one of the 4. Texas, as I said previously, is just overall better, both on the offensive side and the defensive side. I can see this game actually being a high-scoring game. I can see it in the 30s, 37-30. And I'm going to give the nod to Texas, plainly because they have a better offensive line and defensive line than Washington. Now, I'm not saying you should underestimate Washington, and this game is a lot more tougher to try and predict just because Washington's proved it. The Pac-12 was probably the best conference from top to bottom all year round, and they beat who a lot of teams thought would be in this CFP playoff. And that was Oregon. And they beat them twice. So there's someone that you shouldn't underestimate, even though they've had a lot more closer games than any of these other teams on the list here. But I just think Texas has the most potential to really explode. So I have Texas winning this game 37-30. 37 is a really odd number. I don't know how they're going to get there. So I'm actually going to say 38. 38-30. It's an 8-point spread, and Texas is favored by 3.5, and Michigan is favored by 4. I actually think the Michigan point spread is a lot higher than I originally thought it would be, but I'm glad, and I actually hope it's more than a 4-point victory for Michigan. So that leaves us with Michigan and Texas for the college football championship game. This would be a matchup of two really good programs, one from the north, one from the south. This would be a matchup versus two kind of evenly matched teams, are both really good at the point of attack, at the line of scrimmage. I think this would be a very meat and potato type of game, just right there in the trenches. I don't want to even get a prediction because it could swing either way. Texas, in many ways, kind of reminds me a little bit of Ohio State in some regards. So it could be 27-24. It could be 27-24, and I'm going to have Michigan because, of course, I'm going to have Michigan. Do I like that they're playing Alabama? No. Do I think of the three teams, Alabama, Washington, Texas, Alabama might be the toughest matchup for Michigan? I do. If I was in favor of a first matchup for the semifinal, I would wish it was Washington, because I figure Michigan would have a better matchup versus Washington. It is college. People pass the ball a lot in college, so yes, Washington's passing attack would scare me, but Michigan has really good corners, and Will Johnson is going to be healthy for the game that's in 2 more weeks. He could have played in the Big Ten championship game, and he was dressed, but they clearly didn't need him, versus a pudding offense that Iowa is. So who would I have actually wanted Michigan to play, and who should have, I think, who should have been that in the 4th seed? And that's Florida State. Guys, Florida State was left out. They ended up being the 5th seed. They're going to play the 6th seed, Georgia, in the Capital One Orange Bowl. Florida State, ACC champion, 13-0, top 10 defense, and had a top offense until their quarterback went down. As a team, as a program, you did everything right. You went 13-0. You beat every single team on your schedule. You went to your conference championship game. And by the way, you're in a Power 5 conference. It's not like you're in the AAC or the Sun Belt. You're in the ACC, boasting teams like North Carolina and Clemson, who had huge expectations and they were highly regarded coming into the season. You went out and beat every single team on your schedule, You go into the championship game and you win that one as well. The fact that you were ranked 4th coming into the decision after all the championship games were played, I don't think it matters. To me, I don't think it matters what happened to your quarterback. Yes, your starting quarterback got injured, but it happened 3 weeks ago. Or 3 games prior. They won those 3 games with a backup and a 3rd-string quarterback. They still won those games. Obviously, their point total or their offense is going to look different. Did you think it was going to look the same? They still won those games. That should account for something. If nothing else, that should alone account for something. And they were left out. Let's talk about why. The committee, which is composed of, I forget how many people, I'm going to say 13 people. It's around 13 to 20 different individuals. A lot of them have different roles at different universities across the nation, by the way. A lot of them, this isn't their full-time job, analyzing college football teams and games. So these 20 to 13 individuals came together and they put in what many people think as the 4 best teams: Michigan, Alabama, Washington, Texas. I'm not saying that they're totally wrong on that, because I am making the case that Florida State is the most deserving, not the 4 best teams. Now, a lot of people may disagree with me because the product that they want to see on TV or in the stands are the 4 best teams going against. That's all you want, is the 4 best teams. If Patrick Mahomes, and I'm going to knock on wood here, if he tears his ACL in week 17 and they're the 2nd seed, does the NFL kick them out of the playoffs because they're going to be a first-round bye? Or a first-round exit team? No. Just because your star player gets injured, yes, that might change your dynamic of your team, whether it's on offense or defense. Yes, it may look different. Yes, it may look unappealing, but they still won their games that they were supposed to. And more so than basketball, football is not a one-man sport. In basketball, you could have one star, and if they lose that one star, it changes everything. AKA Tyrese Halliburton for the Pacers last year. Not the case here. It may look different, but the results are still the same of the other opponents, and that was winning. So, Florida State should have been left in. They were left out because they thought the loss of their star Heisman candidate quarterback was enough to say, hey, we don't think they're one of the 4 best teams. If they're playing against Michigan or Texas or Washington, it may look like that TCU versus Georgia game in the championship last year, which was a 50-something to like 10 just smashing, and nobody wanted to see that. Well, no offense to TCU, but Florida State as a program has been a lot better in football than TCU has. TCU has been a good program in the Big 12. Don't get me wrong. I'm not disrespecting the Horned Frogs here. But Florida State has been more consistent in their recruiting, their record, and their performance on the field. Not to mention their conference as a whole and the opponents that they're going to is at the same level than what TCU has in the Big 12. So people are going off of a recent bias, a recent memory of last year, and then even of Cincinnati the year prior when they played Georgia. I get that way of thinking, but that shouldn't be the overall way of thinking. I think it should be something to be discussed on the table. But at the end of the day, Florida State did everything that they should. And if anything, I feel bad for the 90-plus players that are on Florida State. You did everything your coaches asked you to do in the offseason, from week 1 to week 13. You did every single thing. You put your heart and soul out in that field, and you won your games. And that got you the 5th seed. I'm not saying it's perfect. The system is flawed, and I think everybody knew that from the first time this 4-team playoff came out. There are 5 Power 5 conferences, obviously, and there are only 4 spots. Some team was going to get left out, and it happened to be this year. It happened to be Florida State. And it happened to be the last year that we have the 4-team playoff format before it goes to 12 next year. So my thoughts on this is that Florida State should have been in. Who comes out? In my opinion, if you're going to leave someone out, you leave Alabama. You leave the SEC champion out. I think everybody would agree that Alabama has not looked like the same dominant Alabama as in years past. Yes, they have played their opponents and beat their opponents like normal. But the eye test would tell you it's looked a bit off. It's looked a bit off. Same thing could be said about Georgia. A lot was coming into this year on the type of schedule that they had in front of you and how weak it was. Now, I'm making the case that they went and beat tough opponents at Missouri, at Tennessee, lost to Alabama by 3 points in the SEC championship game. But they're 12-1, 12-1. If you want to make any other case, you can maybe say Texas just gets left off. They probably look like the most dominant team other than Michigan all year long consistently, but they have a loss on their record, and that's Oklahoma. Losses should matter. And who you play when you play them should matter as well. So are we regarding Alabama as a really good team back when Texas beat them? I don't know. But I'm thinking it should be. Okay, if it was Nick's top 4 teams, I'd have Michigan, I'd have Washington, I'd have Florida State as 3, and I would have Georgia as 4. Because they deserve to be it too. They deserve, I know they lost in the SEC championship game, but they're the 2-time reigning defending champion. That loss in the SEC championship game was the first loss in 29 games. If there's a benefit of the doubt as well that I just gave to Florida, should be given to Georgia as well. Should be given to Georgia as well. So those are my thoughts on that topic, but I think it will be very exciting with the 4 teams that we have in there. You can't go wrong. I'm just saying that it should have been Florida State in there instead of Alabama. But you have Michigan versus Alabama, Washington versus Texas. Both of them are going to be highly viewed, highly rated. They're going to be great matchups. And whichever mixture you want going into the championship game, Michigan, Washington, Michigan, Texas, Alabama, Washington, Alabama, Texas, it's going to be huge. It's going to be great. So I'm excited for that. The next topic I want to talk about here is, look guys, we're in the day and age of bigger, faster, stronger, smarter. That's where we're at with sports. And how did we get there? Technology. Technology allows us to pinpoint exactly how to improve and give us the metrics to go about and do that. I want to read to you guys an article here, and this is a quote by the VP of Customer Success, Chris Pulley, for the company that's Catapult. Now, Catapult is one of the various different computerized tech companies that work with numerous different sporting agencies and organizations around the world. Okay, so this is a quote by him. Okay, one of the biggest trends in the industry is the use of wearable technology. This can include fitness trackers, smartwatches, and other devices that are designed to monitor athletes' performance and provide them with real-time feedback. Okay, so the help of technology and advanced algorithms and data, combined with machine learning, teams and coaches, they can now analyze vast amounts of info to gain insight into different player performance. We see it a lot now in the NFL. You'll have player tracking like pods in shoulder pads or in helmets or in knee pads that tracks the distance that they're running, the speed that they're running, impact, velocity. You'll see it in basketball that tracks how further of a distance that they run all over the court, their stopping and starting motions. You see it in hockey, how fast and how strong they're able to hit the puck across the floor. Sports across the board all have various different technological pieces that help them gain further insight to help further their performance on the court, pitch, field, whatever type of environment that they're playing on, track. And this basically leads to predictive analysis. That is something that, with all this data flowing in through the machine, through the computers, through the processes, how that helps data analysts is it helps to create trends that teams are now able to see and players are able to see so they can better perform themselves, and it helps teams and organizations better help themselves, their staff, in knowing how to help their team and how to further bring in other people that advance what they're trying to put out there. I think all this is fascinating. I think all this is fantastic, and it's just the way that we're going. Because 40 years ago, if you run 8 miles for every single day for 3 months straight, you'll be conditioned enough to do a half marathon. 8 miles every single day for 3 months. You'll be conditioned enough to do a half marathon. How did people know that? Because it was word of mouth. They said it, people did it, they performed it, they were okay. But nowadays, technology can tell us that you may not really need to do that. If you just run 6 miles every other day for 2.5 months, that actually is enough to give you the endurance to run a half marathon. Or even if you have a treadmill, if you have an incline treadmill, put the incline at 10%, run at 10 miles per hour on the 10% incline, do that for an hour and a half, twice a week for 6 weeks. That gives you the same exact numbers and performance that it would at running for 8 miles every single day, 3 months. Technology helps us understand and better evaluate how we're training to either make it more efficient for us to get the same exact results in less time. That's where everyone is trying to get to. How can I become my peak self in as little time as possible and still have the same result? What I had available to me while I was in college, for example, was pretty cool. Something that people a decade before me didn't have access to. And the students that are right now in college probably have different technological availabilities and opportunities that weren't even thought of or even available when I was there. And that trend is just going to further on. And we're going to get to a point where I can't even, honestly, it's mind-boggling to try and predict where we could be with the advancement of technology and sport. And I'm all here for it. I think it's actually exciting to sit down and look at these raw numbers, plug them in, and see, okay, so I did this versus this team, I did this versus this team. How did I compare differently? What can I do in the off-season training to either get me faster, to get me stronger, to get me maybe smarter, to recognize things? Now that piece right there is still something that we as humans can hold dear, is the cognitive ability. right now, with no sort of implants being done, this is still the greatest tool that we have. I just want to make that clear as well. I think this is the greatest tool that we have. Regardless how much technology we have access to, everything revolves around what we have up here. But I still think it's pretty darn cool to be able, in over a period of time, see what your trend is. If it's up, if it's down, if it's sort of plateaued. So I'm excited about where we're at in the realm of wearable technology in sport. And honestly, guys, it's only going to get better. You know, there's a few naysayers that would probably be against that. You know, back in my day, we had to run 5 miles uphill. Well, you know what? You enjoy your 5 miles uphill outside. Okay, I'll take my indoor running around on a treadmill that's not going anywhere and still get the same results, if not even better. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed episode 7 of the Nick Solomon Show, the Sports Charter podcast. More to come next week. I have a few brainstorm ideas and how I want next week's episode to go, so you'll just have to sit there and wait for episode 8 to come out to see what I have in store for episode 8. So thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe. Take care.